Let's get started, folks. Welcome. And I'm Bob Miller. I'm president of Marine Conservation League and chair of Marine Conservation League's Climate Action Working Group. Marine Conservation League develops and advocates for environmental positions that accomplish its mission, which is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of marine in a changing environment. This MCL committee, the Climate Action Working Group, focuses primarily on accelerating clean energy use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We've had excellent speakers on important energy topics, and we'll have more in this coming year. And groups of us are working on developing positions and advocating for them. 3 other Marine Conservation League committees develop positions and advocate on a wide range of marine environmental issues, including many that now involve adapting to climate change. I know some folks here are not members. I urge you to consider joining. We need your support to fund our advocacy efforts. You can go to marineconservationleague.org to get more information. And for those that are members, thank you. I'll outline what we're going to do in this meeting. We are really excited to have special guest Congressman Jared Huffman, a champion for the environment and for addressing climate change now at the federal level. Congressman Huffman addressed this group a year ago, and we'll hear what a difference a year makes in actions to mitigate climate change, especially when some real leaders on climate change in Congress make things happen, leaders like Jared Huffman. Ground rules. For those that are part of this meeting, please put your questions in chat as soon as you can. We'll ask as many as we can. And keep yourself on mute. After Congressman Huffman leaves, we'll continue the discussion for a while after that. And in the last 35 minutes of this meeting, we'll hear brief 3-minute reports from about 9 community organizations about what they're doing about climate change. And I invite everyone to stick around for that. So with that, I'll turn things over to Bill Carney, a real friend of Marine Conservation League and head of Sustainable San Rafael, and Bill Cole, Marine Conservation League board member and head of OFE Marin. Bill?
Yes, I'd like to one more introduction and welcome to Congressman Huffman. He was elected to the Assembly in 2006 and to Congress in 2012, where he, as you know, is a recognized climate activist. And for us, he's a trusted port in the storm, and we count on him for providing balance and understanding and welcome to the world as it is today. We're going to deal with things the following way. We have outlined some set of questions that we're going to orchestrate for the congressman, Bill and I, and at the same time, we want you to put your questions into the chat. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bill with the first set of questions.
Yeah, good morning and welcome, Jared. It's great to be talking with you this morning. You know, many in our audience will probably remember the first event that Bell and I put together with you about 8 years ago, and the title of that was "What Would Climate Leadership Look Like in Washington?" And you know, in 2022, I think we saw that. You know, we had a very good year in terms of climate action on a national level. With the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and even more recently, the Omnibus Spending Act. So could you highlight the the chief ways that these actions support national climate action, and especially how they support our climate efforts here in Marin, like EV adoption and building electrification, carbon sequestration.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that, Bill and Bill and Bob. Thanks for the great introduction. And as we start this conversation, let me just say how much I appreciate all of you and MCL. You had some kind words about me on these climate and environmental issues. I will put it right back to you. On just about everything I work on, MCL is just an incredibly valuable resource and often an ally. So let me echo the pitch that was made for everybody to join MCL. And let me thank you for your just many, many years of great, thoughtful advocacy. So you're inviting me to start the conversation by celebrating some wins. And it's nice to be able to do that. This fight against the climate crisis can often be overwhelming. It can feel like we don't have enough wins, but you're absolutely right. In the last 2-year session of Congress, we did some big and I think transformative things. And so to just sort of summarize some of the biggest impacts that I'm pleased about, you have heard about the $360 billion in clean energy tax credits. These are kind of the core of the industrial policy shift that we're trying to make in the Inflation Reduction Act to really transform decarbonization in the transportation and industrial sectors and the power sectors to some degree. Those are maybe the biggest and most impactful things, but there's actually a lot more, a lot of direct investment. Things like $60 billion for clean energy manufacturing across the US and the whole supply chain of clean energy and transportation technologies. A lot of these changes are meant to not only support zero emission things that we need to make, but to really support workforce development and investment and kind of achieve this clean energy economy that we've been talking about for so long. So that's why I often refer to this as industrial policy change. We've got $200 million in grants for states to develop and implement programs to train contractors to help folks get out there and install these energy efficient systems in homes and electrify our homes. $27 billion for grants and loans to support zero emission technologies, and $7 billion of that is going to be for state green banks. So I think you can imagine a lot of the good outcomes that can come from that. Many of you know that I have been fighting to electrify the largest civilian vehicle fleet in the world, the United States Postal Service. And it's been an uphill fight because a Trump appointee, who's Postmaster General, put out a big multi-billion-dollar contract for clunkers that would get 8 miles to the gallon, and that would be the new postal fleet, internal combustion clunkers. We put $3 billion into the Inflation Reduction Act to strongly incentivize the Postal Service. It's kind of hard to mandate the Postal Service because they have this autonomous status under federal law. But this was a pretty large carrot, and you may have heard a few weeks ago the Biden administration successfully persuaded Postmaster General DeJoy to change that contract so that most of those vehicles are now going to be EVs. I'm going to keep pushing to get us to the point where it's 100% EVs, but to be at 75% out the gate with the benefit of this funding is huge. And that's going to be a real game changer for electric fleet vehicles. We've got a bunch of money in the Inflation Reduction Act for forest resiliency, a couple $2 billion for hazardous fuel reduction, vegetation management, inventorying old growth forests. Those of you who care about the coasts and the ocean will be pleased that there's $2.6 billion for NOAA to fund conservation, restoration, and other coastal resiliency initiatives. And then going back to the prior year, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, there's just a lot in there that we can feel really good about as well. Some bad stuff that we'll have to manage. But the largest federal investment in public transit in history, lots of money for passenger and freight rail, stuff for bike infrastructure and recreational trails, safe routes to schools. You are familiar, I think, with the investments in a national EV charging network, but there's also a chunk of money available for local communities to get EV charging infrastructure out into every part of our communities. And then a lot of money for water. I actually wrote a lot of the water provisions. And this is not big controversial dams. This is actually the cost-effective, truly resilient water infrastructure that we need throughout the West, especially in California. And then 62 billion for investments that relate to the grid. And modernizing the grid is just going to be very, very important to all of the decarbonization work that we need to do. Lastly, you asked about the omnibus. We did get some big wins in the government spending bill, and some of them are very local. So I was able to get $2 million for EV charging expansion in San Rafael, $791,000 for EV infrastructure and equity in Nevada, $650,000 for new energy efficient lighting at Golden Gate Village in Marin City, and then 1.8 million that is going to be critical for the design and planning of the SMART extension over the Russian River Bridge into Healdsburg. I continue to work to try to realize that original promise of getting SMART all the way up to Cloverdale. So those are just a few high points, and there's a lot, absolutely a lot to celebrate. I'll just close out my answer to that question, Bill, by saying if sometimes you don't hear me spiking the football and celebrating as much as I probably should, because these are big wins, it's because we've still got a lot of work to do. And that's the tricky part of this whole climate crisis. People politically, emotionally really crave these mission accomplished moments. And the reality is we're just not going to have one of those in the climate crisis. And we got to find a way to stay motivated and keep working really hard, even without that.
Okay, thank you very much. And Bell has a follow-up
Yeah,
question, I think, on
Yeah,
this topic.
what is the role of the White House and the states in implementing these acts that you just talked about? Because we're beginning to hear more about that, and we just wondered if you could enlighten us.
Sure. Well, the White House has a lot of work to do. They've got to stand up entirely new programs in many cases. And, those are going to come through Pete Buttigieg in the Department of Transportation. They're going to come through the Secretary of Energy in some cases. They're going to come through a whole bunch of federal agencies. And we're going to have to make sure that they do it right and that they do it quickly. We want this money to get out the door. But the states will have an important role too. And when you look at the transportation infrastructure, for example, Caltrans is going to have a huge role in spending the money that comes down to California. And a lot of the funding that you see in the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be for things that some states aren't going to want to do. I mean, it's pretty hard to imagine Texas and Florida doing a green bank, right? But California will. And so we're going to have great opportunities to, compete even better than many other states for a lot of this funding. But we're going to have to keep an eye on our state agencies to make sure that they're doing the right thing, that they're not taking these funds and trying to use it to backfill for, probably what is a coming deficit in California. We go from boom to bust with our state budget cycles. And I don't want to see this funding, backfilling normal state budgetary obligations. I want to see it going exactly for the things that we intended when we passed it. So I think all of us will need to keep a close eye on that.
Good, thanks.
And Bell, you want to follow up with the next topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, there was one question that came up that I thought you might want to comment on. Why is DeJoy still there?
Yeah, because DeJoy can only be fired really by the Postal Governing Board. And we have not been able to confirm enough Biden appointees to have a political majority yet. I think we're nearing the point where we can, but I think DeJoy is smart enough to sort of, count to a majority on his board, and he's begun to moderate his original position on things like this. He actually has also done a few good things in terms of stabilizing the financing of the Postal Service. So I don't know if he'll survive or not. I don't like him. I would have gotten rid of him a long time ago, but we just don't have that power, unfortunately.
Mhm. Well, let me introduce the second batch of questions that we're interested in is the prospects for continuing congressional climate action in 23 as control of the House has changed hands. And, you know, sort of what new climate laws or funding are possible. And so this is a big one, and you're coping with it is another one. So Philip, we'd like to hear you on that set of issues.
Yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed episode 1 of Republican Chaos a couple of weeks ago. You're going to see a full season of this, you know, so get ready. What it means for climate policy. So you asked about new laws and also the broader set of things we need to do. I don't think anyone should hold their breath for, you know, big, impactful climate action by way of legislation. It's going to be hard to do that. That's just the reality. That probably would have been the case with a narrow Democratic majority too, because we may have squeezed about as much good stuff out of Joe Manchin as we are capable of getting. So I think the focus is probably going to have to be on implementation and just making sure that we are delivering, that we are getting this money out the door, that it's being spent in the ways that we intended, and that we're protecting the Biden administration from obstruction, which we are definitely going to see. That obstruction will certainly come from this new House Republican majority. They've made no secret of that, but it's also going to come from Joe Manchin. You know, he was furious that the White House is trying to kind of tinker with some of these EV supply chain and manufacturing standards that Manchin put into the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House is doing that because they want to give the EV industry a chance to succeed. And I think Manchin may have had different intentions with some of these really rigorous standards that he put in place. In some ways, I think he wanted to embarrass EV manufacturers by setting really fast, almost immediate sourcing standards that nobody could meet. So we'll be pushing back on Manchin as well when he tries to slow things down or gum things up. And I'm sure that we're going to see some of that.
And is there a strategy also for protecting all the good gains that were accomplished this year?
Well, yeah, that's what it's all about. You know, through so-called oversight, Republicans are going to try to obstruct and embarrass and do what they do. And our job will be to defend. Absolutely. And to avoid these hostage situations. You know, we're going to see the first one with the debt ceiling coming up here in the next few weeks. And it looks like they're pretty focused on, you know, budget cuts as the terms that they will demand for raising the debt ceiling. We'll see if we can navigate around that without giving away more concessions. I think we can, but we're going to see that kind of hostage taking at every possible juncture in the next year and a half. And we just got to make sure that clean energy and climate actions that we've achieved are not given away in those moments.
Okay.
Well,
So jumping to the third thing that we wanted to make sure to cover, and then we'll get into the chat questions. You were part of the U.S. congressional delegation to the UN's COP27 climate summit in November, not very long ago, which seemed to witness widespread global backsliding on greenhouse gas goals. So what were your chief takeaways from the summit, and how do we meet those goals in the limited time that we have left?
Yeah, there certainly was backsliding in the sense that we did not move forward on these national commitments that need to become much more specific and much more rigorous. There was a little bit of progress on the so-called loss and damage issue, which is going to be really important to bringing developing countries along. but I would agree. It wasn't a hugely successful summit. And when you have these conferences in a place like Egypt, a fossil fuel nation for the most part, and they present, Egypt gets to choose the president of the COP. The host country does that. It's going to be really tough to make it as bold and transformative as it needs to be. And next year, it's going to be even worse because it's at the United Arab Emirates. And they have just appointed their COP president, who is an executive of their national oil company. So I am not happy at all about that. In fact, I just finished a letter to our climate envoy, John Kerry, asking him to get engaged and either find a new president of COP28 or work with the UN to find a different host country, because I think this is absolute BS that we allow this to happen. So stay tuned on that, but you're not wrong in your characterization.
There's a protest going on in Davos about this right now. And I think that and John Kerry has spoken up, taking the position, and it's a reasonable one. This guy is really good, and that he might have more influence on the oil petrostates than anybody, because he's somebody you can count on. So there you are with the answer that they have.
Yeah, I don't like that answer.
Yeah. Okay, and just one more thing on this. How do you think we can get up more funding to assist these other countries in coping with climate impacts? Because what we promised and what we are committing are really different.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard for us to appropriate that funding in the United States, just given our politics. Republicans are going to oppose direct funding of the Green Climate Fund every single time. And so we're going to have to find other ways to do it. And I think these international financial institutions are the answer.
Yeah.
The terms in which they make financing available to these countries for clean energy projects are way too restrictive, and they're way too lenient for fossil fuel projects. And so the outcome is, and I talked to developers who want to do solar and wind in Africa and other emerging economies, and they can't get access to these national development banks the way that their fossil fuel competitors can. So I think if we can change that, it is a way of moving money into these countries to help them decarbonize and also develop economically. And that ought to count toward our basically towards our loss and damage contribution. I believe that'll probably be a big part of it.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a couple of questions coming in, several from the chat, and I would encourage folks to keep sending those in. One is, what might be possible to control the increasing use of fossil fuels in producing single-use plastic? I think this is something you've paid some attention to.
Yeah, I've been working with Cory Booker on a bill to try to go upstream and set much more rigorous standards for these so-called chemical recycling plants, which is a joke. I mean, you're going to hear a lot of this from the fossil fuel industry, that there's sort of new technology for pyrolysis and gasification that is a great way to recycle plastic. And so you don't have to worry about all the plastic that is proliferating in our lives. It's not real, and it's really polluting, and it has terrible public health effects. And so I think we should continue to be deeply skeptical of all forms of plastic recycling, and we need to focus on just reducing the amount of plastic we have in our lives and in our economy. So California's done some really good things, some great bills, I think, being talked about even in this state legislative session. We've got to do a lot more at the federal level. This bill I'm doing with Senator Booker includes a lot of things that the EPA could do on its own right now, setting standards, cracking down on the polluting effects of these facilities. So Those are the things that I'm pushing on. And I think there's room for all of us to get engaged on this. We're going to need to, because as we continue to decarbonize the power sector and the transportation sector, this is the next big thing where fossil fuel is going to try to keep us hooked on their product. They're going to just be pushing a lot of plastic at us, and we need to get ahead of it.
Okay, and another question that's, the EU will soon begin the first phase of implementation of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and to put their carbon price on carbon intensive imports. And should the US be part of the emerging G7 climate club that have a comparable US border adjustment and carbon price?
Yes. And I encourage I talk to my friends who are parliamentarians in Germany and the EU now and then, and I always urge them to do this. By them setting that carbon border adjustment, it puts a lot of pressure on us to do the same, and it's sort of a backdoor way to get the kind of carbon pricing that we need, or at least the beginning of carbon pricing.
Right.
We also have a detailed question here. It says, as a realtor, I'm trying to stay informed about all the new rebates and incentives for homeowners to make environmentally beneficial upgrades. Where can I find a comprehensive list of all the federal incentives and rebates now available?
Yeah, I think the White House just put something out that gives us that. So I don't know, Jenny Calloway from my office is on this Zoom. I don't know if we have that posted or if you might have access to the link that we could share, but the incentives are really great. And I mean, I will just tell you right now, I am in the process of doing a heat pump in my house, and the incentive is really compelling. It's a great time to do it. It's a great time to get rid of that natural gas stove and to get an induction cooktop or something like that. And there's, you know, several $100s worth of incentives there available. That's just at the federal level. So it's worth checking out and maybe circulating it to the MCL community so that everybody's aware.
Yeah, and I just want to add how important these incentives are to put some backbone in our local councils and supervisors in passing ordinances here that actually require this transition. But to have these incentives to back it up is just really makes all the difference. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Senator, we have one more question on this that perhaps you can comment on. Senator Whitehouse has expressed impatience with the Biden administration or apparent lack of aggressiveness on climate. What do you think, and how could they do better?
Well, we all need to always be impatient. So I'm never very critical of Sheldon Whitehouse or anyone else for being impatient. I remember having a conversation with Sheldon about that a few months ago, and I don't know if he still feels that way, but there's a bunch of big rulemakings that have been kind of dragging on, you know, from methane to various power plant standards and, you know, workarounds to address the terrible Supreme Court ruling that we got in the last term. I think he's probably talking about that. And we do need the administration to move faster in its rulemakings. You know, we've got another year and a half of this administration, and what you don't want to see is for them to bring all of these new regulations over the finish line in the final days of the administration, because there's this thing called the Congressional Review Act that the next Congress could do within 90 days of a final rule to basically undo those regulations. And we need to beat the clock. We need to be at least more than 90 days ahead of the end of the administration with these key regulations.
Okay.
And we have a particular question relating to the National Park Service, and apparently millions have been made available recently to beef up their staffing. And the question is, are there any guidelines of how that's going to be tracked and paid and tracked?
I'm not familiar at that level of detail with the Park Service staffing issue and funding, but we'll be interested in it, and I'm happy to look more into it.
Okay, more MCL research here. Great. Let's see, are there, Rewiring America and Building a Decarbonized Coalition? Whoops, sorry, missed that. Are there, what are the changes of permitting reform, sorry, particularly for necessary transmission infrastructure as we electrify everything? How do we get that grid up to snuff?
Yeah, I'm glad that that question was asked, because this was the other piece of, the Joe Manchin deal that Chuck Schumer forged. And it's a piece that I don't support. Joe Manchin as basically a condition for him going along with all these good clean energy investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, demanded separate legislation that would change the NEPA standard for disadvantaged communities and others to engage on projects that affect them. It would hardwire prioritization of a bunch of large projects that have to include fossil fuel projects every single year. It would basically be a presidential stamp of support on the Mountain Valley Pipeline and any number of other large fossil fuel projects every single year. It would roll back Clean Water Act provisions that give states and tribes a special role in approving large infrastructure projects, energy infrastructure projects. And I think it's just bad policy. I'm all for speeding the improvement of our electrical grid, but you don't have to do all these lousy things, and you don't have to put a thumb on the scale for fossil fuel in order to meet our goals for the grid. A lot of them can be met by FERC. They are in the process of some rulemakings. And if we could confirm the chair of FERC, which Joe Manchin is withholding his support for, we would have a governing majority that could move, with some urgency on that issue. But that's one way to do it. The other is just use the tools we've got. We put $1 billion into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for this very issue, to support the streamlining and the expediting of clean energy infrastructure. Give it a chance to work. President Biden passed an executive order calling on all of his federal agencies to coordinate and form a task force to streamline the permitting of clean energy projects. So you've got all of these new things that we're beginning to do to make these projects move faster, and none of it has had a chance to actually work. But Joe Manchin wants to do a lot of damage in the name of streamlining on permitting reform. So you should look very skeptically at these proposals, and I think look very carefully at the things we are doing to speed up and streamline the permitting of clean energy. I think we can get there.
And a good question is, what can we do to incentivize public transportation as we switch to EVs? Many customers cannot afford the charge at home. Have you got some thoughts on that?
That's going to involve a lot of local folks and transit operators. They've got to pay their bills and keep the lights on. But I think we should try to make public transportation as close to free as possible in every instance. And we got a long way to go there. I know that SMART at various times has talked about that. They don't get a huge amount of money at the fare box anyway. And they're going to need broad public support to re-up the sales tax here in the next few years. So making that as close to free as possible would be a great way to increase ridership and get the broad public support that they need. Plus, I think it's just good incentives and good policy.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a chat question that's close to my heart. What do we need to know about the Farm Bill? And my augmentation of that would be, is a bill that's being reauthorized this year, and is agriculture an area where bipartisan action benefiting climate might be possible? And in particular, having to do, is there anything in the Farm Bill that might be supportive of carbon sequestration in soils?
Yes, the answer is yes. And we do have a few of these programs, mostly overseen by the NRCS, that, at a very small, almost pilot scale, are supporting soil health and good practices that we know can be climate solutions. We've got to find ways to scale that up and to embed greenhouse gas reduction and soil health in a whole bunch of programs. So the EQIP program, there's a stewardship program in the Farm Bill where lots of money is pushed out through RCDs and other local partners. All of that should have climate measures built in to the programs as components. And it shouldn't just be this little boutique, pilot thing that we tinker around with. We've got to embed it and we've got to scale it. And I've been part of a group in Congress that has come up with recommendations for the Farm Bill that would do that. So let's keep an eye on that. But I think scale is going to be the thing that we need to focus on, and not just these little, tinkering kind of grants and pilot projects that we've done in the past.
And
So
you're
that's
uniquely positioned as someone who represents both urbanized regions and also a large rural region to address these issues. So thank you.
Well,
for that.
and I've got a lot of good pioneering agricultural leaders in my district too. So, Albert Strauss is out there feeding seaweed to his cows, and we've got all kinds of people doing cutting edge things outside the box to sequester carbon in the soil and build biodiversity and other things. So I benefit from learning a lot about this, from right here in Marin.
So one question that is more general is, how can the Republicans screw up IRA implementation, and what can the Democrats do about it?
Well, I'm sure that they're in their evil laboratory thinking of ways to do just that right now. So, look, they're gonna try to defund a lot of these things every year in the budget process. They're gonna threaten government shutdowns. They're gonna, we know what's coming because I've been in the minority and I know what they try to do every single time. And they're going to try to embarrass the Biden administration. They love doing that. So that's why I think it's super important that as these programs roll out, that they're done really well. We need this to be successful. But if we do that, I don't know that there's a lot they can do to stop it, Bill. And, I'll give you a great example of that. These industrial policy changes that I was describing a little while ago are resulting in a huge solar manufacturing project coming to Deep Red, Georgia, in the district of none other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Perjury Trader Queen, as we call her. But lo and behold, even Marjorie Taylor Greene is a smart enough politician to realize that this is a whole bunch of jobs coming into her district, and she supports it. So that's the benefit of some of these things that we have set in motion, is that they're going to start producing really good jobs in all sorts of interesting places, and they have the potential to begin to change some of the politics of clean energy.
So speaking of obstructionism and its relation to economic reality, we have a question here. How do you think the debt limit will play out, including the final outcome?
Yeah, well, I know how I would like it to play out, and it goes like this. Instead of using, this cliff a few weeks down the road from now as a wedge to force us to reopen the government funding deal, that the bipartisan omnibus bill that should fund the government all the way through the end of September, I would argue that we've already passed a bipartisan government funding bill. I mean, it included a lot of stuff I didn't like. It was bipartisan. And so instead of reopening that and renegotiating that, I think we should reach out to the sensible Republicans who don't want to see the disruption of a debt ceiling crisis, and do what we call a discharge petition, where if you get 218 signatures on a discharge petition, it goes straight to the floor for a vote. It doesn't, Kevin McCarthy and his Freedom Caucus people that he's empowered can't stop it. And so I'm hoping we do a discharge position and just be done with this issue and prevent it from being a hostage situation.
So on the subject of sort of coastal matters here in California, I mean, in your district, what stricter rules are possible on plastic production and petrochemical plants? You have, you're proposing an act or a bill together, as you mentioned, with Cory Booker, or that you're thinking it through. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is basically about the fact that these plants are, highly polluting. They tend to be located in communities of color. And that's just the legacy of this. And so we need to crack down on the standards for both continuing to operate plants like that, but also for siting and permitting them going forward. And that's what our bill's all about.
That's great. Yeah.
So speaking of impacts on disadvantaged communities, that's one of the questions here. What's being done to fund electrification and renewables in disadvantaged communities, particularly through the IRA?
Right. So you've probably heard about President Biden's EJ40 policy. He did this by executive order, and it requires that 40% of our investments in these initiatives go to historically disadvantaged communities. That is beginning to happen in some really great ways. I mean, I've gotten huge grants for all sorts of things, from broadband to solar energy, for some of the tribes I represent. And we've never seen anything like this. It's basically embedding environmental justice at the front end of all of these initiatives in a way we've never done before. And it's I think, going to be an ongoing framework that will do a lot to correct these historic injustices. So it pretty much applies to everything the federal government does. I mean, we're out there looking for ways to get EV charging money into Marin County. And, we have to think about disadvantaged communities and not putting EV chargers in Ross. It gets a little bit tricky because we have such good air quality in Marin County that even when you might have a disadvantaged community like Marin City or the Canal, and we're kind of running into this now with a grant that we're trying to put together with Cool the Earth. Our air quality is so good that we may not qualify for some of the measures that they may require under EJ40. So we're going to keep trying for creative ways to make sure that our disadvantaged communities here in Marin benefit from this initiative as well.
One question that is of interest to people here is what chance does the Recovery Wildfire Act have of passing?
We're going to have to continue pushing forest resiliency and vegetation management. And these are things that I think there'll be bipartisan support for. I don't know if that bill in its current form, will pass in this Congress, but there are things we can do in the appropriation bills and other legislation, even with Republicans on that issue, because their districts are very, very vulnerable to this.
And another international question. There have been rumblings in the EU, Macron in France and others, that the IRA's domestic content mandates might run afoul. And I just lost the question. Where did it go?
I think I get it.
Yeah,
Industrial policy, yeah.
of trade laws. Yeah.
We've heard this from Macron, and we're going to hear this from others in Europe. And I just met with some German parliamentarians who were expressing concern about this. So the Biden administration has signaled that it is open to some fine tuning of some of these policies to make sure that, along with our European allies, we're all moving together on decarbonization and industrial policy. I think that's important. But it's also in some ways working, because the EU itself is looking at kind of their own version of the Inflation Reduction Act, and big transformative incentives to drive clean energy industries there, and that's setting off kind of the righteous competition that we want to see. We should do it cooperatively with the EU because they're our ally, and in some ways, they have even better goals than we do on decarbonization. But I think we can get there. I think we will get there.
So back on a local issue, it's and big one too. What barriers need to be addressed for offshore wind energy? This is paramount here. Yeah.
Well, it is, and I've got one of the best and biggest projects just off the coast of Humboldt County that is moving forward. I just met with one of the two developers that was successful in the auction in December, and this is a big deal, and I'm excited about it, but it is complicated, and we got to get it right. So I think one of the most important things is community benefit agreements. The auction had a set aside. This particular developer is going to have to allocate about $8.5 million to various types of community benefits, and this ranges from like the fishing community that could be impacted by, in some cases, the loss of access to fishing grounds, and there's probably some other impacts. It includes tribes, it includes other community groups that will see some benefits up front just from the proceeds of the auction, and they're in negotiations right now to come up with that package. But in an ongoing way, there should be all sorts of community benefits, workforce, partnerships of various kinds. And it's going to be, I think, a real good news story for Humboldt County. You guys probably know that the economy up there, never really recovered to the heyday of timber extraction when things were really booming unsustainably. And this is about the best thing to come along in a long time. There's a company called Crowley Maritime that is literally investing over $100 million to modernize the port of Humboldt, not just for those floating wind platforms that are going to go out there in the next decade, but to manufacture the floating wind technologies that'll be used up and down the West Coast. The Port of Humboldt is uniquely suited for that because it doesn't have any bridge at the opening of the harbor. And these turbines are like 10 stories tall. They're incredibly big, and they can't go out under the bridges of most ports. Humboldt is perfectly suited to do that. So we think that they'll be manufacturing these massive floating wind turbines right in Humboldt Bay for servicing Morro Bay, for servicing Southern Oregon. And that is just going to be a massive economic driver to Humboldt County. So people are pretty excited about it, but lots of mitigation and other details that'll have to be worked out.
There's a question that we have, which is, so how can we utilize all this power without damaging wildlife in the ocean, without transmission lines damaging the upland habitat?
Yeah, we are going to have to improve transmission in order for this to happen. And we've got about 10 years to bring that new transmission online, because that's about how long it's going to take to make power from these first lease sales. They haven't yet figured out exactly where the new transmission needs to go. There are some theories that we should do an ocean based along the ocean floor transmission that would take that electricity down to the Bay Area and beyond. Others think we just tie in right in Humboldt County and just upgrade that system, which we need to do anyway because it's really inadequate. So, all that's going to get worked out, but I am confident that we can build that transmission without major compromises to our environment. They've done this in a lot of places in Europe, slightly different offshore wind technology in the East Coast of the United States. but a lot of studies have happened, and people who worry about whether this will disrupt the Dungeness crab migration and all sorts of other things. We've got a fair amount of data already on that, but we'll be careful as we go forward and make sure it's done right. One of the encouraging things that we've seen in some of the floating wind deployments in Europe is that, yes, you do restrict some fishing access because these massive platforms are tethered together with steel cables that you don't want trawlers, for example, to get tangled up in. But the benefit that you have is that the fish populations tend to rebuild in those areas and spill over into surrounding areas. It's a little bit like a marine protected area, and those spillover effects, the abundance that you see in those areas, can actually be quite good for fishing in surrounding areas. So we just need to be thoughtful and engage the fishing community and the resource agencies on the front end. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to do that.
So Ginny's telling us we need to think about wrapping up, but a couple of more questions from the chat. As an individual, where's the biggest bang for the buck in making an impact on climate change?
Buy an electric car, get a heat pump, get rid of your natural gas appliances, just do all that now.
Okay, a whole menu there.
There's one I think that we should, that's a local one, which is, can you give an estimate as to when the Klamath Dam removal project will be complete? And the person asks, thanks for your hard work on this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we're going to start taking down dams in a matter of actual weeks. I was on the ground with the Secretary of Interior and the governors of California and Oregon last month, and we're no longer talking about this as some sort of off in the future thing. Literally, the construction firm is mobilizing at the Iron Gate Dam to begin taking that thing down. So it'll be phases. We've got 4 major dams that are going to come down, and it'll take a few years, but the first of them is going to come down this year. So that's kind of exciting.
Very.
And kind of similar and very local one, any estimates of timing on Route 37 improvements, and what is the best solution up there, and how would what can we do to achieve it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And this is sort of the bad news part of Caltrans being responsible for spending all of this wonderful new federal money that we're passing down. Caltrans doesn't do real resilience very well. It's new to them. They widen freeways, and that's what they're trying to do right now on Highway 37 in a real frustrating way. The good news there is that because we have gotten engaged, and many of you have gotten engaged, the Marin County segment of Highway 37 is finally getting talked about as a chance for an elevated causeway. And I think we may be on track to make that happen. And that's what we need. The short answer to your question, what's the solution? It's an elevated causeway. Ideally, a causeway that facilitates wetland restoration, that is multimodal, and will be truly resilient. So the Marin County segment, which is the part that was underwater last week, where Novato Creek does its flooding, may be on track for some kind of a causeway, and that's good news. Unfortunately, the part that they wanted to build now, so the first piece of the Highway 37 fix to go forward is the part from Sears Point to Mare Island, and they're just proposing a widened, hardened freeway in the existing roadway. It's a really bad project, and unfortunately, I've done everything I can to get them turned around to try to make this causeway ready and elevate it and support the full restoration of that incredibly large wetland complex, and we're just not getting there. So I think Caltrans any day now is going to finalize an EIR that is for a widened, hardened freeway. They call it an interim project, but this is going to be a permanent fixture if they're allowed to build it, and it's going to prevent us from building the causeway that we need and deserve. So it's worth staying engaged on that. And what we might be able to do, even though they're going to move forward with an EIR, is we can force design changes as they go forward. So that's going to be where I focus my efforts, and I really hope MCL stays engaged on that.
And as we come to an end, could you give us some ideas about how we can support you in your efforts to deal with the current congressional situation?
Oh gosh, thank you for that. Well, I just need opportunities to vent now and then, so thank you for that. Thank you for the incredibly good policy work you do, for giving me a chance to hear your good ideas through forums like this. I can't even count the number of dialogues like this that we've done together with you, Bill, and Bill, and all of you. So that's really wonderful. It's a great chance for me to just maintain a two-way conversation with great environmental leaders in my district. Just keep being you. I appreciate it a lot.
So thanks very much. I mean, it's so impressive to hear the range of detail that you're able to finesse. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate all the good questions that came in to give you a chance to demonstrate that ability. That was great. So thanks so much for making time available and engaging with us.
Really appreciate it. Hope we can do it again.
Thanks a lot.
Great.
Thank you so much.
So Bob, we'll turn it back to you.
Yeah.
Sure.
No,
So there was a lot of information there, and so we've left some time for folks to discuss what we heard. And let's start off with Nona. You're on mute. Nona?
You're muted.
Nona, you're still muted.
Okay, sorry, it was a mistake. I had my hand up to applaud and I did not have a question. Thanks.
So, discussion. Now, we heard Congressman Huffman address probably 25 different topics. Anybody want to say more? Jody?
Good morning, everybody. This isn't so much about what Huffman mentioned. It really has to do with the incredible opportunity, really, that we all do face around moving electrification forward, given the rebates and everything that's available. And the fair, the Marin Fair is going to have the theme of electrification. I just think the next few months give us so much opportunity to do an education campaign to the whole Marin community, to get people to understand and to know about heat pumps and to understand and to move forward on at least understanding when to make that transition, if not to make it sooner in their homes particularly. So I just think I just wanted to put it out there, given the kind of support we have in Washington, federally and statewide. I'm not sure that the county per se is ready or able to do the kind of educational campaign, and all our little cities, can do what we can. But I just want to put out there, I think if we don't educate people, ordinances down the line, are not the way we necessarily want people to have to make that transition, but we're going to have to do that because of the urgency of climate change. But I think some kind of coordinated education program that's really visible to community members across this county is really important. And I don't quite know how to make that happen, but the county has that as an agenda, but it's going to be at least a year I think, before they get to that point. So anyway, I just very much appreciate him, of course, and all of the information. And then how do we use it locally is one of my questions for us as a community of environmentally concerned individuals.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Ken?
Maybe just following up a little bit on what Jody had to say, because the other aspect of this, and Congressman Huffman mentioned, there's funding for workforce training in the IRA. And one theme that you keep reading about and hearing about on podcasts and stuff is about the shortage of trained electricians and who can start carrying it and put in EV chargers, upgrade people's panels, do the work necessary to move in the direction of building electrification. And so I know the county has got a program as well. They're talking about putting together some sort of a workforce training thing. But I just think we can have a role in helping to make sure that they do that and that the state implements workforce training as well. So that would be my point.
Thanks, Ken. And I know that Corey Betov, after the November COG meeting, where we heard about MCE programs, was emphasizing the need for those training programs because he saw that shortage as being a real limitation on progress, especially around building electrification. Nona?
Yeah, no, I do have a question that goes along with Jody and with everyone else's push to electrify our homes. Having just gone through a 3-day power outage in my house, and many others did. I guess what has to go along with that is some kind of an education, which will push banking, power banking, in some manner. I relied on 2 real total no-nos in order to get through the 3 days. One was a very small generator, which is noisy and terrible for the environment, but it kept the refrigerator going. And the other, of course, is having a gas range. So along with this has been a demonstration of how we can, from a practical standpoint, electrify our homes at the same time, survive the kind of onslaught that we have had over the past certain number of weeks. So any suggestions on that score would be welcome.
Yeah, I think there will be. Pam?
Well, I think one of the missing things in our community as far as workforce is so many different people have contacted me or others about who do I hire to help me through getting solar and battery, or because they're getting different information from different contractors, and there just seems to be kind of a gap in knowledge. People really need to have their hand held in a way that is understandable. Makes a lot of sense that they would. And there really aren't enough people to do that. And so would be an excellent business for more people to be in. That's thank you.
I wanted to ask one question about on Jody's question, which is quite profound and important. What David Muller and Bill and others of you who have really are leaders in electrification in the county, what do you think the most effective ways of educating the public are? Because we've been doing it a while, and what works, do you think?
Yeah, that's a pretty open-ended question, Bill. So why don't we have
but I think
like
they
a two-minute answer and make sure that other questions get asked as well. David, do you want to say something?
So we are going to do a quick answer. Well, I tell you, Bill, my experience has been there's no silver bullet. we need to use every single communication tool at our disposal because different people get communication different ways, different people hear it differently, and so on. So there's no silver bullet. I think it's like lay out all the options that are available and exercise all of them.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think these are great comments gravitating around electrification. Maybe we need to convene the folks who have commented on that and address these questions, try to come up with a coherent strategy. I think we're at a really sweet spot right now in terms of being able to move forward and to pivot from, the easy stuff of new buildings to the real work of getting electrifying existing buildings. So that's a topic, and I think it'd be great. Maybe the MCL Energy Group could be a forum for that. But then now's the time to do it, and there's lots of possibilities.
Thanks. I have a question for you, Jenny. And it has to do with the circle of folks that Jared Huffman deals with in Congress. Is there a small group that either meets regularly or is constantly in contact with each other on environmental and especially climate-related issues? Who are Jared's peers? Did you hear that?
Is she here?
I don't think Jenny's still here.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong. I was looking at the wrong person. So that let me say that's a question that I have, and if anybody here knows, that would be great. If not, then we should move on. My apologies. I was looking at somebody else.
Yeah.
David.
Just a clarification on your question, Bob, are you thinking his small group like of other elected officials and governmental staff, or are you thinking a broader group including like community representatives? So what do you, it's a great question.
Yeah, I'm more thinking about in Congress and not just on the House side, but also on the Senate side. Is there a small circle of leading lights? Clearly, Congressman Huffman is one. Who are the folks that he most interacts with? Oh,
He just mentioned Cory Booker as one. Yeah.
Okay. So is there further discussion? Ken?
Yeah, I wanted to maybe change the subject. Right towards the end, we had started to have a discussion about Highway 37 and about the upcoming EIR from the state. And I know this is probably more of a land use and transportation MCL committee issue, but I'm curious as to what we could do to sort of sound off on this issue and try and move the state more in the direction of a causeway for the Mare Island segment. What could we be doing soon on that?
Yeah.
Kate Powers is on the MCL board, has been really active. Marine Conservation League is part of the Baylands group, State Route 37 Baylands group. That's been meeting with state representatives. So Kate, do you want to give a brief reply? And I know we've talked about a longer presentation at a later meeting. Kate?
The long and the short of it is that Caltrans just wrapped up its a 2-year process called the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study. And they looked at what ultimately needs to do along the whole corridor from 101 to Highway 80. The report divides the different segments as phases of Highway 37 for implementation. And the preferred alternative is a raised causeway, except for along the whole corridor that would touch down at high elevations in a couple of places along the corridor. It would be in the same alignment. Prior to this report being done, there were 2 interim projects proposed. One was from 121 to Mare Island, and that's the interim project that Jared Huffman has stuck his neck out in urging Caltrans. And it's being driven by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to widen that portion of the road because of the congestion. The politicians that are responsible to their constituents for that segment, they're proposing bringing in a lot of fill that will impact some of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife protected land there. There would have to be mitigations, and there's some political negotiation going on about lengthening and widening Tole Bridge as a mitigation. There has been a lot of pushback from environmental groups, and where it is now is the interim project from 121 to Highway 80. The draft EIR was released last year. The final EIR was expected out this month. They're progressing along with the three alternatives that they have originally proposed, and there has been a memorandum of understanding proposed. Governor Newsom has directed his Natural Resource Agency, Wade Crowfoot, and the State Transportation Agency talks, and I forgot how to say his last name, have designated one person from each of their agencies to work out an MOU on how they will progress. They don't want this, MTC does not want a lawsuit to happen that will slow this interim project from being implemented. So Steve Kinsey has been hired as a consultant in trying to hammer out the MOU, and also a woman who worked on the design alternatives study that preceded the Pell report. The good news is, I'll just end this really quick. The good news is that the segment from 101 to Atherton Avenue was, the EIR on that was scoped originally as increasing the levee. It is now being proposed as a causeway. The scoping comments were due last week. MCL Susan and I, as individuals, sent in scoping comments, but that preferred alternative is for that phase of the causeway that phase of Highway 37 will be a causeway that will be elevated to 2130, the Ocean Protection Council's forecast for sea level rise. So there's a
Great.
lot of potential for Novato Creek restoration, floodplain along that area.
That's terrific. Thank you, Kate, for that brief report. Would say this, that some of us had discussed having a Highway 37 segment actually for this meeting, and decided that it made sense to put that off for a couple of months. But Marine Conservation League is, and Kate in particular, have been heavily involved in following it, and we've been advocating with local folks as well as state folks, and the Valence Group for State Route 37 has been doing good work, and we're part of that. So stay tuned for a lot more on that.
I just want to say that Jared really took the lead. He stuck his neck out, and he's been a true leader on this when others have kowtowed to political pressure.
Yeah, in terms of environmental adaptation to climate change, this is a huge deal, because you're talking about so many acres of precious valence. Okay, so are there more questions? David, and then I'll call on myself.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little slow on that, Bob. I just got to say that one question that I had posed about what's his, how do you think the debt ceiling issue is going to play out? What's going to be the end result? it seems like there's going to be a lot of swirl around that particular issue. And at least my take on his response is he seemed to think it was manageable through discharge petitions or some other mechanism. And I'm bringing it up again with this group just because I think there's going to be so much swirl around that particular issue. It could easily get us distracted and use all of our individual and aggregate limited energy, consternating about what's going to happen on that. And the reason I posed the question is I consider Jared probably has the best insight on that of anyone that we might rely on for insight. And it was encouraging to me that he seemed to convey that it's manageable. Don't freak out over that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to ask the same kind of question, which is, does he see that the takeover of these committees and the issues, the big issues, are going to somehow change the people who are the people we're worried about because of other kinds of interests that they have? Will they be moderated? And he seems to think that that may be possible. I wondered if others had, we don't have much time, but did others have a response to what they think he was saying on that subject as to whether it's going to be possible to maneuver in the House these days? I mean, Bob Archer or Peter, what do you think? No answer.
Bill, there have been some excellent podcasts on this topic, and in general, the idea is that if you're talking about environmental legislation, there's not much room for maneuver, so very little will happen. If you're talking about the debt limit,
Well, not just that one, but a whole set of things. That's
yeah,
okay.
well, if you're talking about all environmental issues, not
Yeah.
there are poor prospects, and actually I'll see if I can get around some links to podcasts from serious analysts who do this stuff for a living. What I was going to do was just to address Nona's question, really, which is about, well, how do we increase resilience in Marin County to begin with in the face of power shutoffs? And there are various options. Big battery projects are one of them. There's a pre-application for a large battery energy storage system that's been out there that has its share of flaws, but big battery is very helpful. But the other is to have more better use of electricity within Marin, within our own footprint, through use of distributed energy resources, both generation and demand management, and creating microgrids that can island when there are large-scale power shutoffs. Now, in the case of, in your case, losing power for 3 days, it really depends on how local it is. But the more microgrids there are that are out there, the more potential there is to be hooking onto one that has islanded from any outage and can provide power. And we've had speakers on microgrids, including Peter Schwartz, who may still be here, who presented on that 2 years ago. It's not an easy issue, but it's a huge issue for California. Leslie?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Citizens Climate Lobby has done some great work about talking across the aisle. Several years ago, did an event down the peninsula with a group that was, how do you talk to conservatives about all of this? And I think Jenny Callaway and Jared's office would have a list of those in Congress and the Senate who would be people we should be reaching out to and encouraging others around the country to reach out to. But more specifically, just how do we talk to everyday people without triggering them? And I think that that's a huge issue. We all recognize that, the environmental movement, all of us have been, yelling from the rooftops for a long time. And we've made a lot of progress, but not enough. And so how do we move the needle a little bit more beyond the choir? And I think that idea of telling stories and creating an opening to talk with conservatives, I would turn to Citizens Climate Lobby for their wisdom about this, because they have got some success in DC talking about this. So I think all of us need to be reaching across the aisle to our neighbors, our electeds, et cetera. So it's a thought there. I was posting a couple of comments about communication strategies, Yale Climate Center, Climate Communication Center, and Potential Energy Coalition, which is not a utility. It's a really interesting group of very smart marketing people who are designing ways to talk to various demographic groups across the country. And it is women who are the most persuadable to take action, to change their minds and do things, and mothers, no surprise, and youth. And so it's really easy for us to focus on those we know and speak the language that we know best. But we, I think, need to really be focusing on how to broaden our vocabulary around this.
Nona?
Yeah, going back to Bob, to your comment on local resilience in times of power outages. Actually, I think PG&E is already working on what should we call islanding. I'm not certain what the appropriate term would be, but they documented really quite clearly where power was out in Mill Valley, for example, on two occasions. On the two occasions when it was out and then on briefly and then on again, off again for a couple of days. I think maybe the education needs to go down to the individual homeowners like myself, who really during a power outage enjoy having a refrigerator and hot water, like two basic things. And that could have been done. In our case, we resorted to a small generator to keep the refrigerator going. Not a good thought, not a good response, but necessary in our case. So not to individualize this too much, but rather how to kind of shift the strategies among individual homeowners from generators, for example, to power banking. How to make power banking affordable. People with money, with a lot of money, are installing them and enjoying the fruits. So how to bring it right down to individuals, because that's ultimately where the decisions are going to be made on how to respond to outages. They're not comfortable.
Yeah, and as more and more folks get electric vehicles, that's going to be the power generator of choice. Those are very big batteries, and with judicious use, they can help power a household for many hours. I know when we get our electric vehicle, sometime soon, I hope, that's one of the things that we're looking for, is because it has bidirectional charging. Bill?
Yeah, I was going to say that also, but I think larger that the kinds of backup issues that Nona's raising need to be part of that conversation about how do we move forward with electrification, because it's something on the public mind. To Leslie's point, it's part of communicating and addressing concerns that people have about electrification. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in, and you know, vehicle to home is a big part of that potentially.
So
Can I make one more comment following on what Bill just said?
Uh-huh.
Thank
Oh,
you.
it's 10:27 and we have reports to do. So if you can make it super quick.
I'll
that
make
would be
it super
great.
quick. Yeah, I heard something yesterday about an induction stove that actually has a battery in it. And because one of the big, resistance moments is, well, when there's a power shut off, at least with my gas stove, I can cook and heat water. So that was really interesting. And I was trying to look up the name of that and couldn't find it just to put in the chat. But there's something that the Climate Center and others are really working on, which is battery powered buses that are, obviously they're movable resilience batteries to plug in where needed. And to Nona's question about diesel generators versus any other way to survive, there are electric generators available. You can buy one at REI. They're not cheap, but they're quiet and they work. So I would
Like, you
recommend
mean
that.
battery
Yeah,
supported? How do you mean electric?
we're going to have to move on.
Okay.
And one folks get with Nona offline, because I think there are answers to your questions now. We have not had reports from organizations for months. And so what we're going to do is get to reports from community organizations. The reports are going to have to be brief. We have many organizations, and we're going to have to keep it to 3 minutes. And at that point, I'm going to say thank you. And since I'm going to be making a report, I'm living under the same rules. So why don't we move to Carlene, and 3 minutes, or Lori or Annika, whomever from Cool the Earth is here to talk about Ride and Drive Clean.
Great, I will kick it off. Thank you, Bob. Per the usual, we've been super busy at Cool the Earth with our Ride and Drive Clean collaboration. We have some new fresh webinars coming up in the next month, including New Year, New Ride and Save Money with an EV in 2023, both focusing on the hefty federal and state incentives that are now available, and showcasing the new EVs coming out in 2023, many with bi-directional batteries for resiliency. You may have seen the article in the MCL newsletter, but I wanted to just emphasize that now is a great time to get an EV before the end of February, because the new federal tax credit, the Clean Vehicle Credit, is being phased in. And the part about battery manufacturing hasn't come into play yet. And that should be coming into play sometime in March, is what we're hearing from the IRS. So if there's some way, if you're looking for an EV, now is a great time to be able to benefit from that $7,500 federal tax credit. So I would, many of you are our partners. I'll be sending out a partner note later today, asking for you to promote some of our great webinars that are coming up. I also wanted to address the concern about the cost of EVs. Now there are over 10 excellent long-range EVs on the market for less than the average cost of a new car. And that's before these great incentives. For example, the very popular and peppy Chevy Bolt now costs $26,000. And in terms of equity, there are additional incentives available for residents of low wealth communities with savings up to $20,000 on a new EV. And we are working on bilingual content at Cool the Earth here about these savings and helping get the word out. Thank you.
Perfect. And thank you. So let's go to Tom Flynn of Green Change.
Okay, I just wanted to make you all aware of the next event coming up with Green Change. That's January 30th, Monday evening, 6 o'clock. It's on climate hope, and we've got some really great speakers addressing that. In particular, Kim Stanley Robinson, who is recognized for his pursuing very technically accurate ways of looking into the future in science fiction. And he's with his Ministry of Hope book has essentially put together a very interesting exploration and vision of us making this climate crisis work out. And in addition to him, we've also got Alma Sungi Beck, who leads up the Climate Hope Network, which is an international network that's promoting a lot of interesting things, like joyful climate news involving social media experts from all over the world. And then finally, and another speaker there, I'll mention just Hari Kabai, who is with Youth Climate Art and Art for Change. And then we also have the Earth Day event coming up April 23rd. We've recruited a lot of great organizations in support of this. And in particular, we've gotten some funding that's going to help us to offer free tables to youth and disadvantaged communities to have tables there. So stay tuned.
Okay, terrific. And so let's go to Bill.
Okay, quickly on Sustainable San Rafael, the quarterly CCAP meeting was held yesterday with the city and
That's the Climate Change Action Plan.
Yes, and electrification remains a topic, and we're looking for the existing appliances part or rehab part to be coming into focus in the next 5 months. Also, EV strategy apparently is ready to roll out now, so we should all be looking for that as well. And San Rafael is expecting its housing element response from the state to come back, so that'll be interesting to see if we're on track there. So those are a couple of things. On electrification, one of the ordinances that we would like to see locally considered is requiring the inclusion of appliances, of appliance assessment in the contractor's reports that take place at the time of sale of any building. And that would be a way of alerting people of what's coming down the road in terms of the transition to electric. So that's a specific thing that we're pushing. I also will put in a brief plug for MarinCAN. That board is now consolidating. It's on the verge of completing their first round of interviews with the endorsed solutions that add up to, we hope, and we're working on them adding up to net zero by 2045.
Thank you.
Bill, do you want to add something about the report about sea level rise?
Thank you. Yeah, there was the San Rafael's new adaptation planner working with Corey, Kate Haggerty, I believe it is, reported yesterday on her beginning work in the canal, very community-based sea level rise planning, and that's getting underway. It should be very interesting for all jurisdictions to track on that.
Thank you, Bill. David, EVBE squad.
Thank you. I'm going to mention 3 items. We're continuing to push on further adoption of the county's 3 building electrification and EV reach codes. As of the end of last year, 5 jurisdictions had adopted all electric for new buildings, 4 had adopted the enhanced EV charging infrastructure reach code, and 2 had adopted the reach code for energy efficiency for major remodels. Just this week, Tiburon City Council voted unanimously to move ahead. They're going to formally hear the reach codes in the next month or so. So that'll up all those numbers by 1, and a number of other jurisdictions are expected to go. Another initiative we have going right now is urging all 12 Marin jurisdictions to make climate a top priority in their 2023 strategic planning meetings, which generally happen around the beginning of the year. The idea is to take the CAP and the climate emergency resolution off the shelf and put it as a priority for annual planning. And then the last item I want to report on is I think you all know that the Marin Civil Grand Jury report from June of last year recommended the development of a county-wide building electrification plan. The County Board of Supervisors has approved funding to do that. And the county sustainability team, Dana Armanino's team, is going to be leading the charge on that. It'll probably look similar to development of the 3 REACH codes. So that's something to look forward to this year.
Great. Jody, 350 Marin.
Hi, yeah. Let me just mention a couple things about also Fairfax Climate Action Committee quickly, just to say we are going to be tabling along with San Anselmo Climate Action Committee at Good Earth in Fairfax once a month. So, you know, in terms of trying to get out and communicate with the public, we'll be out there tabling. We're also setting up a library series to try to educate folks about electrification in general. In terms of 350 Marin, we've gotten a request from College of Marin for some interns for this school year, or this next semester. So we're looking into that. We also are still working on fundraising for interns, possibly in the summer. Our intern from last summer, Elise, is headed to Washington to intern with Huffman's office for 2 months. So these small educational projects and internships to get youth connected are paying off, because Elise will be working with Jared. We're really excited about that. But we also got a contact the other day from a University of Chicago student who's looking for a summer internship on climate policy and climate action. So we need funding to support her. And also we're working, of course, with 350 Bay Area. We have 350 Marin, we have a retreat this weekend. So we're going to be looking at what initiatives we want to take on this year, including potentially Andrea is interested in the Farm Bill and how we can work with sequestration and soil issues. So I think that's the gist of what we're up to. Stay tuned, because we would like to get back out on the street and do some local events. It occurred to me it would be great. We've had these very wonderful EV car shows, across Marin. Maybe we need some kind of heat pump show where we gather some vendors and maybe have some kind of public with Bayren there and other groups, both profit and non, that can help bring people out to have conversations about what does it mean to electrify my home, try to get a few vendors there, etc. So again, I don't know who would take that on, but I thought it was a good idea, heat pump show. Anyway, thank you.
So is Kirsten here to talk about environmental forum? She must have left. Then Belle, why don't you talk about LFA Marin and environmentally ecologically sound practices partnership? And Belle is not back in. Belle, okay, I'm reading my messages. She's out and trying to get back in, and I don't know what the problem is. So let me say a few things about what Marin Conservation League has been doing. Obviously, we're holding these meetings, and we've been doing that for years. This Climate Action Working Group has focused on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and we're going to continue these types of meetings. We've stepped up our advocacy. We've worked collaboratively with others to advocate for this robust effort by Marin County and its jurisdiction to accelerate building electrification. Did a bunch of things. David mentioned a countywide plan to accelerate electrification of all existing buildings. We see that as being very important. And what we'd like to see is really going well beyond electrification of new buildings and major remodels to more on replace on burnout, sort of ordinances around that. And so that's going to be a focus, and I think that that Bill has mentioned that, and that's been a focus of his. We've been closely following MC Clean Energy's innovative programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want Marin to help prove that certain valuable innovations work and then spread them elsewhere, and think that MC Clean Energy can be a powerful lead in getting grants to tap into the money that's flowing from state and federal funds for addressing climate change. And so a group of us have met many times to discuss what are the best innovations for Marin to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and what should MCE Clean Energy be doing. We're certainly going to continue to advocate for accelerating building electrification and adding EV charging infrastructure, and what they and the jurisdictions can do around that. And there are a bunch of other innovations that we're carefully considering advocating for. One is simply something that been touched on a couple of times, which is just adding more electricity capacity and resilience for Marin. And we'd like to see faster development of more distributed energy generation and demand management tools. And I think that there are good prospects for that, and also improved transmission. There's going to be more electricity needed, and we're looking at ways that MCE and PG&E and others can address the increased load that's coming down the pipe, and more, because we've been looking at a lot of other innovations very carefully. And of course, we advocate that any innovations must really help underserved groups. There's a pitch attached to this, which is that contact me if you're interested in joining with others and doing a deep dive into a range of innovations that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a range of innovations to advocate for. And as you heard earlier, on the other side of the house, the other three committees that Marine Conservation League has, we've been focusing a lot on adaptation to climate change. And Highway 37 is one example of that. I should say that we've also advocated on a couple of very important state level issues. That's it for us. I can see that Bill is trying to get a hold of Bell so that Bell can participate and make a report. Are there any other organizations that want to make a report to this meeting?
Karen put a report in the chat for the environmental forum just now.
Okay, so okay, Karen. Is Karen here?
Yep, I'm here. Just to let you know, the Environmental Forum is going to be presenting a 5-part advocacy and leadership training series in March and April. And we're going to have 2 classes on social media techniques. And we want to help build confidence and skills for community members who want to be effective advocates. And we invite folks who've already done advocacy training or want to be better advocates to participate in this. We're also going to be doing a webcast/field trip about biodiversity and adding native beneficial plants to your gardens and looking at there's some folks who are doing some native plants in median strips, and please join us and help us promote those things. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, is there anybody else who wants to make a report for their organization? Bill? You're still on mute.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, Belle's having a hard time getting back on with her internet apparently. So let me try to fill in briefly if I could for Belle on the biomass project and also on the ecologically sound practices partnership. So on the biomass project, we have now received our first deliverable from the study. So that's under review, and the collaborative of all the stakeholders that we've collected around this project has been convened. It was really inspiring to hear the diversity and range of perspectives from that group. So we're looking forward to their involvement in helping to shape the study results as they come forward. So that's happening on that. On ecologically sound practices with the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, the MWPA is just beginning their next year round of projects review, and Belle is in there with others on the ESP Coalition, applying those guidelines and practices to those projects as they come along. So that's a snapshot of the many things that Belle is up to.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more reports, I want to remind folks that the next Climate Action Working Group is going to be on February 17th. We may be having a program on carbon capture and storage, but we still need to wrestle that to the ground. Regardless, we'll have interesting speakers. And if nobody has any other issues to raise, then
Victoria has her hand up.
Okay, Victoria, I don't see your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi there. Hi, I'm Victoria from OFA. So I thought I'd fill in for Belle for just a 1 minute report. So the next OFA meeting is on Thursday, February 9th at 6 p.m. by Zoom. And they'll be including youth on climate change and a report on extreme weather in California.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Typically brief report. And Pam, thanks for spotting that. I didn't see it. Okay, I think we're done, folks. David?
Just one quick add here. Bob, you mentioned about MCE being a potential key player in the whole building electrification arena. And I want to point out that Peninsula Clean Energy, PCE, is really not only partnering with all the climate organizations down there, but literally leading the charge, I think, in the South Bay. And I literally had a conversation yesterday with one of the staffers of MCE as to, was there internal awareness at MCE of what's going on in the South Bay with PCE leading the charge, also in partner with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. He said there is some awareness, but they're just starting to talk about that. So I think there is an opportunity, if anyone on this call is attending MCE, either the executive committee meetings or the board meetings, is to urge MCE to reach out to PCE and tap into what they're doing. Apparently, a lot of the work is being done by a consultant. So it doesn't take internal staff, but perhaps the consultant could be retained by MCE and leverage what's going on already down there, rather than having to reinvent it.
Yeah, and yes, and there are interesting things that are happening elsewhere. And I'm glad that you mentioned Peninsula Clean Energy, because they have had a focus on innovation. including 24/7 clean power, which can be difficult to actually achieve in the real world. And they seem to be making real strides in their work on that. Yes, well, thank you for that. Are there more comments? Okay, I think we're done, folks. Thank you.